Welcome back to America's Retirement Headquarters, home of the Retirement Guys Formula and America's Medicare Associates with Scott Kirshner and Chaz Price. 419-794-3030. That's how you get in touch with the guys. 419-794-3030. Online, arhq.com. Competition is usually a good thing, but right now, the stock market is feeling the pain of retirement savers seeking an alternative to all this volatility, a little competition on their side. Here's analyst Larry McDonald and portfolio manager Adam Johnson on Fox Business.
$10 million in cash today generates $510,000 a year in treasuries, in one-year treasuries. Think about that. A year ago, you're talking, this was $70,000.
What you're saying, Larry, if I'm hearing you right, that the average investor is smart enough to recognize there's now a choice between stocks and bonds. So that average investor is going to say, I'm going to sell my stocks and I'm going to go buy bonds and just make 5%.
Well, but let's talk about that. Is 5% enough growth to sustain a retirement portfolio, or do people need to be seeking something even more?
Well, I don't know, Chaz. So you and I may differ here, right? 5% to me, I don't think 5% is enough, especially with, the things I see with, the possibility of healthcare and the cost of all of that. I truly don't believe the 5% rate is enough. This isn't my lane. This is your lane. So why don't you take a jump on this and tell me why you think 5% is enough?
Yeah. I mean, I like the audio that we just played, McDonald and Johnson, and 5% to me, over the years of doing this for 20 years, one of the questions that I'll generally ask in a financial planning discovery meeting is, what's your number? And what I mean by that, I kind of get a little bit of a questioning look, but people generally, I feel, have a number in the back of their mind that they would be satisfied with if they could get on a regular basis. And generally, it's usually like right around 5. Sometimes I'll get a client that'll say, yeah, I'd really love 10, but satisfied, not necessarily ecstatic. So I think conceptually, 5% is a good realistic return expectation for the market, for your retirement savings. If you have a well-diversified portfolio, I think that's definitely a return that you could achieve pretty easily.
So that's not my number, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just say 5%. I don't think that's a number for me. And there may be a lot of listeners out there that think the same thing. Do you feel, or do you think that because of the way the market and the economy and the way things are going today, I'm just happy to get 5%. I met with a client just this past week, and he's really, really perplexed. He's just overloaded on what to do with some of his money. He lost a great deal because of this, the market. So he's happy with anything over 4%. Mm-hmm. So do you think that the market has actually driven this, where people are more content with, man, if I could just get 5%, mm-hmm. I'd be happy. I always thought, if I ever won the lottery, what am I going to do with all that money? I'm going to put money away, I'm going to invest it. My magic number was somewhere between 8 to 10%.
Okay.
And we're not there.
Yeah. That's a lot of the time, too. One of the things that we caution investors on that are doing it themselves is they see these average rates of return. And average is just simply that. It's you add up all the occurrences and divide by the number, but it doesn't actually take into consideration the sequence of those returns. Mm-hmm. And so when you do the calculation, and we do this at all of our events, generally we'll teach people the difference between an average rate of return and a real rate of return. The average rate of return is that number that you see, that you kind of brag about at cocktail parties, and clients say, "Oh, I got a 10 or 15%. My gal's doing 15%." But really, what was the dollar amount that your money experienced? Because you could be up 100% in 1 year and get zero, the next, and still have the same averages if somebody hit 50% every year for 2 consecutive years. And most people would say, "Yeah, I'd prefer the 50%, consecutively versus those high highs and those low lows." And so, I get what you're saying. 5% historically, is a little under the market's average, but you're right. The market has kind of set the expectation that you gotta, my mom would say, get while the getting's good. And I think these bond rates right now are a real alternative. Cash stands on its own right now. It is an asset class that you cannot overlook. If I can get a 5% on a money market and lock it in,
Sure.
a lot of people I think are happy with that.
Well, they've seen the downside of it. They've seen like like we've talked before about the health savings accounts for health insurance, right? Banks are paying 0.005, and you can get a money market. I know we have the opportunity to get some people some money market funds that are earning in excess of 4%. Well, 0.005, and then you go 4 point something or other. That's a lot better, and a lot of people are happy with that. But what about the unforeseen expenses like healthcare costs and long-term care? I mean, long-term care is not covered by Medicare, so you've got to take that into account as well.
Yeah.
How do I, the independent income system separates money in different buckets for different things. How am I happy with 5%?
Yeah. So I think that you bring up the main point here is that you're talking about inflation and the purchasing power over time of your money eroding, meaning your dollars are going to buy less goods and services in the future, particularly so in the healthcare space. I think everybody agrees that healthcare costs are increasing, exponentially. I think the average rate in our financial planning projections that we use for inflation in general is about 3, but for healthcare we use 7.
Okay.
And so that's a good point. And so I guess the takeaway here I would have is that this is the reason why we recommend you really look at your long-term care in your health plan, because those unforeseen expenses like a long-term care stay, if you're not planning for those, if you haven't started saving early enough or had a plan in place, that is the one area where I would agree that 5% is not going to make it. You're going to need closer to 7 or 8 or even more to try to keep up with the cost of inflation. But the other point I make is that I've talked to a lot of folks about retirement planning, and many times they're not, they're just really interested in being able to meet that required minimum distribution.
Sure.
So if you're not familiar, the required minimum distribution is the amount of money that age 73 currently you have to start taking out of your IRAs, all of your tax-deferred investments like your 401ks. And the sensibility that I have with managing those retirement distributions is that if I can create an income that is equal to or greater than the required amount of money that the government's going to make you take out, where we don't have to sell any of our principal, and I can just generate dividends and income, most people would say that's a pretty good strategy, and that my corpus, my principal stays intact. I'm just living off the interest.
Right.
And so that's kind of where we get that 5% withdrawal. The first year of required minimum distribution is about 4. So we're meeting that and then some. Keeps our principal intact, allows us to stay invested during tough times, and it meets the minimum requirement from the government.
And you think about it, somebody at 70, I think it's 73 now, where you have to start taking your RMDs. Somebody at 73, by then they're probably pretty well set with their monthly expenses. They have a pretty good budget put in place by then, right?
Exactly.
And if you figure out a way to cover my RMDs where I'm not losing any principal, and that number is 5, I guess I get that. Okay, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, right? So I guess there's pros and cons to both concepts. Obviously, everybody wants to make as much money as possible, and if they can get that 8 to 10%, amen. But I think a lot of people are satisfied with the 4 to 5 at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we've had meetings just recently where a client said, "Hey, we need a guy. We're really concerned about retirement.
Absolutely.
We don't have a whole lot saved, But when I went through those numbers and actually did the financial plan, and we projected a very conservative 4.5-5% interest rate, the client had 100% probability of success,
Yeah.
and she was so surprised. And I said, "That's Mary. That's because you don't have any debt. You've paid everything off. You have very little expenses. Your income plus the 4% withdrawal for required minimums meets all your needs, and it's all relative. So 5% may be good for most, but for some may need to either save more, spend less, retire later. We can help you answer those questions."
And honestly, it's really all about shifting that mindset from the working world when you're trying to accumulate and accumulate. Obviously, if you were making 5% in 2014, you're not doing a very great job. It was pretty easy to throw money back then and, just hand over fist, do well. But in the times we're here right now, 5% is actually far better than what a lot of people are getting out there. And as you enter into retirement, as, continuing that 2014 analogy, we're now 9 years hopefully older and wiser, but certainly closer to retirement. And it is about preserving what you've accumulated and not taking major setbacks like, a 20% correction, a 30% correction, things like that. It's all about preservation and distribution. That is what retirement is. And that is why the name of the show is America's Retirement Headquarters. That is why it is the Retirement Guys formula. It's to take these things into account, help you shift that mindset, and create a plan to, again, I have to pay myself a quarter here, Chaz, to go the distance in your retirement. Here's how you get started. Start developing that plan. 419-794-3030. It's the number. Once again, 419-794-3030. You can also go to the website, schedule a time, always available, arhq.com.